It's a major break. TBI agents say they now know who killed Tina Farmer in 1984 and then dumped that redhead on the side of I-75 in Campbell County. Despite knowing her killer, agents say they can't charge him. The suspect died 4 years ago. Jerry Johns was serving time for trying to kill someone else, someone with red hair like Tina Farmer. Someone he tried to kill in the very same way, according to FBI and TBI agents. 10 News reporter Cole Sullivan joins us now with the connection between those two cases and the effort to use this cold case as a way to crack a series of cases known as the Redhead Murders. Cole?
On New Year's Day in 1985, the bound body of a young woman was discovered beside Interstate 75 in Campbell County, Tennessee. She had been strangled and had likely been dead for several days. Investigators recorded her fingerprints, examined the items recovered with her, and searched for a missing person report that matched her description. They found nothing that confirmed who she was. Without a name, detectives had no home to search, no relatives to interview, and no reliable way to reconstruct the final days of her life. She entered the case file as Jane Doe. But whoever left her beside the highway had not erased every trace. Her clothing was collected. The blanket wrapped around her body was preserved. Her fingerprints remained in the file. For more than 3 decades, those items held 2 answers investigators could not reach: the identity of the woman beside Interstate 75 and the name of the person responsible for her death. It would take modern DNA testing, a missing person blog, and a fingerprint card created years before the murder to finally connect the pieces. But when the first major breakthrough came, the person it exposed was already beyond the reach of investigators. Before we continue, subscribe to Radius of Crime for carefully researched cold cases where preserved evidence finally reveals what happened. And stay until the end, because solving this murder would leave investigators with a much larger question. Now, back to the case. Her name was Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. She was born on March 7, 1963, and was 21 years old when her body was discovered. She had been reported missing from Indiana, hundreds of miles from the Tennessee highway where investigators found her. To the detectives in Campbell County, she was an unidentified homicide victim. To her family, she was Tina. Her sister, Liza Plummer, later described her as quiet, kind, and trusting. She also wanted people to understand that Tina had not been abandoned. She had relatives who loved her and had spent years wondering why she never returned. According to Liza's later account, the family was told Tina had left with a truck driver believed to be heading toward Kentucky. They did not trust that explanation. Exactly when Tina began traveling, who accompanied her, and how she reached Tennessee remain uncertain in the public record. No confirmed account explains whether she accepted a ride, traveled with someone she knew, or encountered the person responsible while away from home. What is known is that by January 1, 1985, Tina's body had been left beside Interstate 75. Investigators later said she was pregnant when she was killed. It became another identifying detail in the Jane Doe file, but even that did not lead detectives to the family searching for her in Indiana. 2 investigations now existed without anyone realizing they belonged together. In Indiana, relatives were searching for Tina Farmer. In Tennessee, detectives were trying to identify Jane Doe. One file contained Tina's name and the people waiting for her. The other contained her fingerprints and the evidence from her murder. For the next 33 years, those files remained separate. The autopsy established how the young woman had died. It could not tell investigators where her life had begun. Without an identity, detectives could not determine where she lived, who had last seen her, or what had brought her to Campbell County. The recovery location widened the possibilities. Interstate 75 carried travelers across several states. The victim might have lived nearby, but she could also have been passing through Tennessee. She might have died near the place where she was found or been transported there afterward. The person responsible could have lived in the area or continued along the highway before anyone discovered the crime. TBI agents worked with the Campbell County Sheriff's Office. They pursued the available leads, retained the victim's post-mortem fingerprints, and preserved the clothing and blanket connected to the case. No comparison returned a confirmed identity. Missing person records and unidentified victim files were also divided among different departments and states. Tina's report in Indiana did not automatically reach the investigators handling an unidentified homicide in Tennessee. The fingerprints needed for the identification already existed. The problem was that no one knew which missing woman they belonged to. Eventually, the leads ran out. The file remained open, but detectives had nowhere else to take it. Then, as agencies began comparing other deaths along southern highways, the Campbell County victim became associated with an even larger mystery. During the 1980s, several young women were found dead near highways in Tennessee and surrounding states. Many had red or reddish hair. Some remained unidentified. Several had been bound or strangled. The similarities led investigators to consider whether one traveling offender could be responsible for multiple deaths. The cases became collectively known as the Redhead Murders. But the label suggested more certainty than investigators possessed. There was no firm agreement on exactly how many women belonged to the group. Some cases shared significant similarities. Others were connected mainly by hair color, geography, and the way the victims had been left near major roads. One theory proposed that the offender might be a truck driver or another frequent traveler, someone who could cross state lines without appearing out of place. It was a possibility built from the locations of the bodies, not proof against a particular person. In April 1985, officers from 5 states formed a task force to compare the growing number of highway deaths. The effort faced a basic problem. Several victims had no names, while reports, witnesses, and physical evidence were scattered among separate jurisdictions. Because so many victims were unnamed, detectives could not trace where they had last been seen, whether 2 women had passed through the same truck stop or whether they had encountered the same person. A body beside an interstate showed where a journey ended, not where it began. The same jurisdictional problem would later lead the FBI to build a national initiative around killings committed along America's highways. That national pattern could not prove Tina was the victim of a serial offender, but it showed how a mobile killer might remain hidden while local departments investigated apparently unrelated crimes. For Tina's case, the theory supplied context, not an identity, and not proof that one person had committed every death. As the years passed without an arrest, public attention faded. The Campbell County case returned to its original questions, yet the most valuable evidence had not been lost. In 1985, blood typing could exclude some people, but it could not identify one individual with the precision of later DNA profiling. The clothing recovered from Tina's body and the blanket wrapped around her were therefore documented and retained, even though no one knew whether they would ever produce an answer. Years passed. Investigators retired, witnesses became harder to find, and the paper file aged. Tina's family still did not know that her body had been recovered. The Tennessee investigators still did not know which family was searching for her. The case eventually came under the attention of TBI Special Agent Brandon Elkins. By 2016, Elkins had worked on the homicide for more than a decade. He knew what earlier investigators had attempted, which leads had failed, and which pieces of evidence remained available. The items had not changed. Forensic science had. In November 2016, Elkins resubmitted the victim's clothing and blanket to the TBI crime laboratory. More than 31 years had passed since they were collected. Using methods unavailable in 1985, analysts detected semen and developed a male DNA profile. They entered it into CODIS, where crime scene DNA can be compared with profiles already held by law enforcement laboratories. The system returned a name, Jerry Leon Johns, born November 16, 1948. Johns was a convicted violent offender whose DNA was already available for comparison. Investigators now had a known man directly connected to the biological evidence. But the database result did not explain how he knew the victim or what happened before her death. Agents needed to examine his history and determine whether anything in it resembled the Campbell County murder. They found an attack committed only 2 months after Tina's body was discovered. On March 5, 1985, Johns encountered a young red-haired woman in Knox County. Later reporting identified her as Linda Shockey. According to accounts based on the court record, Johns used a gun to control her, tore her shirt into strips, and used the fabric to bind her. He drove toward a wooded area near Interstate 40, tightened the material around her neck, and strangled her until she lost consciousness. He left her near a drainage area, believing the attack had silenced the only witness. Linda survived. When she regained consciousness, she worked her way back toward the interstate and reached a passing driver who summoned help. She could identify Johns, describe the vehicle, and recount what happened before he abandoned her. Her statement led to Johns's arrest. In 1987, he was convicted on numerous charges, including aggravated kidnapping and assault. When investigators later compared Linda's account with Tina's murder, the overlap was difficult to dismiss. The red hair, the binding, the strangulation, the interstate locations, and the short gap between the crimes. Now DNA from Tina's case matched the man already convicted of attacking Linda. Johns had also been questioned about other highway murders during the original era. A retired TBI investigator later recalled that Johns denied involvement and refused to explain why he had attacked Linda. In 1985, the similarities created suspicion. They did not provide the forensic connection required to charge him with the Campbell County homicide. Johns went to prison for the crime Linda survived. Tina remained Jane Doe. Decades later, the preserved evidence finally joined the two cases. But investigators could no longer confront Johns with what they had found. Jerry Johns died in custody in December 2015. Brandon Elkins resubmitted the evidence in November 2016, roughly 1 year later. After more than 3 decades, the evidence identified Johns, but he was already dead when investigators learned his name. Investigators could not ask where they met, how Tina traveled from Indiana, or what happened during her final days. They also lost the chance to question him about the other women associated with the Redhead Murders. His death did not invalidate the DNA result, but it limited what could happen next. There could be no interrogation and no criminal prosecution. The CODIS match reopened the investigation rather than ending it. Agents reviewed Johns's history and interviewed people who may have known or associated with him, testing whether any legitimate explanation existed for his connection to the evidence. By the time the case reached a grand jury in 2019, the DNA result had been weighed alongside his violent history and the attack Linda survived. Yet the victim herself remained officially unidentified. The DNA had supplied one name. Detectives still needed hers. In August 2018, agents learned about a missing person blog. One entry described a woman reported missing from Indiana. Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. Her age and description resembled the Campbell County victim. After decades of unsuccessful comparisons, resemblance was not enough. Investigators needed something conclusive. TBI intelligence analyst Amy Emberton searched for a record that could establish the missing woman's identity. She found a fingerprint card created for Tina in the early 1980s. Investigators had also retained the post-mortem prints taken in Campbell County. More than 3 decades after those records were created in different states, analysts made the comparison. They matched. The woman found beside Interstate 75 on January 1, 1985, was officially identified as Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. Modern DNA testing had exposed the man connected to the evidence. An old fingerprint card restored the victim's identity. TBI agents and analysts began working with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department to learn more about Tina's disappearance. They also asked anyone who knew whom she had been with before her death to come forward. The identification did not reconstruct her final journey, but investigators could finally contact her relatives and examine the case through the life of a known victim. After 33 years, Jane Doe was Tina Farmer again. The renewed case combined the preserved evidence from 1985, the DNA match to Jerry Johns, his criminal history, and Linda's account of a closely similar attack. On December 18, 2019, the evidence was presented to a Campbell County grand jury. The grand jury concluded that if Jerry Johns were alive, he would be indicted for the first-degree murder of Tina Farmer. Johns was never tried or convicted of her murder because he had already died. A grand jury finding is not a verdict, and he had no opportunity to answer the allegation in court. For Tina's family, the result was therefore incomplete, an official conclusion without a prosecution. District Attorney General Jared Effler said he was disappointed the case could not end with Johns facing trial, but relieved that questions left unanswered for more than 34 years had finally been addressed. TBI Director David Roush said the agency hoped the case would also offer hope to other families still waiting for viable leads to produce answers. The findings showed that investigators had assembled enough evidence to pursue a murder prosecution had Johns lived. The case had begun without either person identified. 34 years later, Tina had her name back, and investigators had identified the man they believed was responsible for her death. The results still left the wider question untouched. Was Tina his only murder victim? The identification of other women once placed beneath the Redhead Murders label made the larger theory more complicated, not less. Elizabeth Lamott was 17 when she disappeared from New Hampshire in November 1984. Her body was found near Interstate 81 in Greene County, Tennessee, the following April. A DNA profile had been in CODIS since 2006, but she was not identified until Manchester police located relatives and obtained family samples in 2018. That breakthrough narrowed the theory. The TBI later said it had found no evidence that Jerry Johns caused her death. Michelle Lavone Inman's case showed a different limit. Her remains were recovered beside Interstate 24 in Cheatham County in March 1985. Forensic genetic genealogy restored her name in 2023, but her killer remains unknown. Identification gave detectives a life to investigate. It did not automatically solve the homicide. Then there was Lori Ann Mealer Pennell, found off Highway 78 in Mississippi in January 1985. Investigators learned that she had last been seen at a West Memphis truck stop, a detail that reinforced the interstate theory without proving who killed her. The clearest warning against forcing every case into one theory came from Tracy Sue Walker. She disappeared after being seen entering a car with a group of older men at an Indiana shopping mall. Investigators believe she was taken to Tennessee, where she was killed. The TBI has said her death is not connected to Jerry Johns and has suggested that the men involved may have been organized and may have harmed others. That conclusion changes the shape of the wider mystery. It suggests the same interstate corridors may have been used by more than one predator, while the shared features of the victims cause separate crimes to be grouped together. Each restored identity supplied a hometown, relatives, and a personal timeline. Sometimes those facts reveal a connection. Sometimes they show that cases which looked alike from a distance may have followed entirely different paths. Tina Farmer is the only homicide victim authorities have positively connected to Jerry Johns. Linda Shockey survived his attack. The other deaths associated with the Redhead murders remain separate investigations. Some may be connected. Others may have been committed by different offenders who targeted similar women and used the same interstate corridors. The patterns are troubling, but no publicly disclosed DNA, fingerprint, or witness evidence proves that Johns was responsible for the entire series. His death left investigators unable to ask whether there were other victims. the wider mystery later drew an unusual group of researchers. In 2018, students in Alex Campbell's sociology class at Elizabethton High School began comparing timelines, locations, and victim details. What started as a class project continued for years as later students reviewed new identifications and reconsidered which cases genuinely belonged together. 2 students later pursued the work outside normal class hours, meeting weekly and consulting specialists in forensics, knot analysis, behavioral profiling, criminal investigation, and prosecution. After struggling to gain the attention of some of the agencies holding the original files, they presented their findings to detectives and the media in the hope that publicity would generate new information. Their research suggested that a smaller cluster of cases shared stronger features than the broad Redhead Murders label implied. It also helped return public attention to women whose files had faded from view. But a profile can guide questions. It cannot prove that one person committed several murders. The official conclusion remains narrower. Evidence tied Johns to Tina, not to the entire series. What resolved Tina's case was preservation. The biological evidence endured until DNA testing could identify Johns, while the old fingerprint records remained available to restore Tina's name. For 33 years, the public record described Tina through the circumstances of her death, her approximate age, her red hair, the blanket, and the highway. Her name restored what those details could not, the life that came before the crime, and the family that had never stopped remembering her. Jerry Johns never stood trial, and the missing hours of Tina's final journey may never be recovered. But evidence preserved in 1985 eventually established what the original investigation could not. The young woman found beside Interstate 75 was Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. After more than 3 decades, she was no longer unknown. If this case stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to Radius of Crime for more cold cases where old evidence brings victims and their families long-awaited answers.